A year and a half later, in France, a young man was traveling with another mahogany box. His name was Francis Doublier.
My father, from my earliest memory, was the most fun-loving, delightful human being. I remember when he was older, he said to me, if I had it to do over again, I wouldn't change the script.
Francis Doublier boarded the Lyon to Paris train, unconscious of any appointment with destiny. He was just 17, an apprentice at the Lumière factory in Lyon. The Lumière brothers had picked him from the factory floor and handed him their latest invention.
Monsieur Lumière warned me, do not let this camera out of your sight, Francis. So I carried it around with me every place I went, and even put it under my pillow when I slept. Francis Doublier.
Instead of bringing the world to a studio, as Edison did, the Lumières developed a camera which would go out into the world. Portable, weighing only 8 pounds, the cinematograph could not only take moving pictures, but also project them. And Francis Doublier was assigned to the team that would now unveil it to the world. On the afternoon of December 28, 1895, Doublier and his colleagues set up their equipment in the basement of a Paris cafe. Only 33 people showed up. The arc light sputtered, and a frozen image flew across the room. Then, in full motion, workers poured out the doors of the Lumière factory, almost tumbling into the arms of the audience. Imprinting their image on the eyes of a generation. Every face that passed before the camera, every shaft of light that swept the screen, proclaimed the birth of something startlingly new. In less than a minute, the Lumière workers passed before our eyes and out of sight. The forebears of every human face that would henceforth gaze into the camera. The audience was astonished. One man offered 10,000 francs for the camera. Another shouted 20,000, then 50,000. But the Lumières refused. The Lumières had a revolutionary idea. They would not sell cameras, they would sell reality itself. They recruited Alexandre Promiot, Félix Mesguich, Gabriel Vert, who fanned out with the mahogany boxes, the first correspondents of the cinematic age. Within weeks, the images came pouring back. Venice, Egypt, pyramids, Japan, the elephants of Siam, the brash streets of New York. But it was Francis Doublier who was assigned the first great news story of the cinematic age. Moscow, the coronation of the Tsar of Russia. Doublier's camera captured images that would be played for a century. Two days later, 500,000 Russians gathered outside Moscow to receive small gifts from the Tsar. Suddenly, a platform collapsed.
I heard screams behind me and panic spread quickly. I climbed up on the shoulders of the person next to me and made a path over that terrified mass. We finally recovered our senses and were able to start filming this horrifying scene. 2 hours passed before we could even think of leaving our position, which was littered with mangled corpses. Francis Doublier.
More than 3,000 people were trampled to death, but the films of the tragedy would never be seen.
And this is the cup marked 1896. This is the same cup that the peasants were looking for. To the day he died, he doesn't know how he survived. And later, he told me that the Russian government confiscated the film. Of course, they were secretive even in those days.
Francis Doublier's adventures were only beginning. He took his camera to Constantinople and India, China, and Japan. As his scrapbook of postcards filled up, he made a decision. Doublier returned to Paris and went to see Louis Lumière.
I have traveled more than 160,000 miles in 4 years. I'm grateful to you for letting me see the wonders of the world, but I'm returning my equipment. It's time I think of my future and learn a trade. Francis Doublier.
He moved to America and for the rest of his life claimed to be one of the world's first newsreel men. Hardly anyone paid attention. When the images of czars and pyramids came to town, they were heralded by steam calliopes and bass drums. The news arrived with the clowns. Traveling showmen bought the films from the Lumières and their competitors. In Britain, Biograph steam tractors hauled elaborate news wagons to country fairs, and the news rolled in with the acrobats and the lion tamers. Gaudy stage fronts proclaimed the most incredible attraction of all: reality. Barkers and pitchmen promised war, volcanic eruptions, and royal spectacle. Across North America, traveling showmen brought the news of the world to people who had never been more than 50 miles from home. The first great information medium since the printing press, 400 years before, arrived in people's lives pulled by horses and donkeys. The news was brought to rural Quebec in 1897 by a penniless French aristocrat, Henri de Grand-Seigne d'Autrive, and his mother, the Countess d'Autrive. For the next 9 years, they took their grandly named historiograph projector around the province and into the United States.
It's great, it's marvelous. In a few medium-sized trunks, Monsieur le Vicomte d'Autrive carries millions of actors, railway trains, parades of great armies, huge caravans, grandiose scenes, all vividly alive. A show like this is worth 10 times the price. Le Trifluvien de Trois-Rivières.
The news arrived in Halifax, Nova Scotia, with Edwin S. Porter. Within a few years, he'd be one of the greatest directors in cinema. But in 1897, he was traveling with Professor Wormwood's Dog and Monkey Theater.
As an extra attraction, the Wormwood's Monkey Theater will present the latest projecting machine with new and startling views, including the Queen's Jubilee Parade and the colonial and Indian troops. You will witness the sight of a lifetime as if you were there. Halifax Morning Chronicle.
In the great cities of the world, the news was born in the vaudeville theaters. In New York, it arrived in Coster and Biles Music Hall, where it joined the Dancing Girls and Acrobatic Dogs. And it was in these music halls that the news film would find an unexpected power. War would establish the moving picture as the dominant news medium of the next century. The chain of events that led to the world's first cinema war began in Cuba in February 1898. In Havana Harbor, the U.S. battleship Maine lay in wreckage, the victim of a mysterious explosion. The American public was enraged. Even though the explosion may have been an accident, the yellow press blamed Spain, Cuba's colonial master. Within 2 months, the United States and Spain were at war. Vaudeville audiences were thrilled by the images of war. They cheered for Teddy Roosevelt and his celebrated Rough Riders, and wept to see the coffins of the sailors who died on the Maine.
You know, people could read about various atrocities going on in Cuba, according to William Randolph Hearst, in the newspaper, and then they could come to the theater at the end of the day. They could throw rotten apples and cabbages and fruits at the screen when a shot of a Spanish battleship was shown.
The clamor for more war footage grew, and some people heard the call of opportunity. Two small-time vaudevillians, Albert Smith and Stuart Blackton, scratched out a living making low-budget comedies. And they had ambitions to be newsreel men. In the Spanish War fever, Blackton got carried away and boasted all over New York that they had exclusive footage of the Battle of Manila Bay, where the Americans had destroyed the Spanish fleet. In fact, they never left Manhattan.
We knew we were in trouble. Word had spread that we had taken pictures of the battle. To caller after caller, we said we hadn't developed any of the film. We sat down and looked at each other. Blackton said we could fake a sea battle. And I said he was insane. Albert E. Smith.
"40 years later, Blackton revealed how they did it.
Pinches of gunpowder set off by a lighted punk on the end of a wire produced the effect of the big guns. Grand total for producing the Battle of Manila Bay, $3.55.
Its effect was electric.
Pastors and proctors music halls played to capacity audiences. Almost every newspaper in New York carried an account of the showing, commenting on our remarkable feat. Albert E. Smith.
A French filmmaker went them one better, with underwater footage of the Maine, shot through a goldfish tank. By now, Thomas Edison had also realized there was money to be made in war news. So he sent forth his cameramen, one to Cuba and several more to New Jersey. By 1900, these quiet woods saw more wars fought than any battlefield on Earth. Edison advertised a series of exclusives. The Rough Riders in Cuba. U.S. troops shooting a Spanish sniper. The heroic advance at the Battle of Caloocan. All of them were music hall hits. All were shot in New Jersey.
News had to make its way as entertainment in the vaudeville houses. It had to compete with jugglers, with singers, with short skits. And if it didn't grab the crowd, if it didn't sort of appeal to enough people in the vaudeville house, it could simply be removed from the bill.
And if the music halls ever tired of Spanish war fever, there was Canadian gold fever. In the late 1890s, 100,000 would-be prospectors set out on the arduous journey to the Klondike. The world saw men searching for gold and squandering it in Dawson City. But the first moving image of Canada ever to be recorded was this. At the dawn of the cinematic age, cameramen for Edison, Biograph, and Lumiere stood before Niagara in awe.